Stand with me, if you will, on the banks of the Indus River, 5,000 years before our time. The sun rises over what we now call Pakistan and northwest India, and in its golden light, something extraordinary unfolds. Cities rise from the floodplains, not small settlements, but vast urban centres with populations reaching 40,000 souls. This is the Indus Valley civilization, and it represents one of humanity's first great experiments in organised life. Consider for a moment what these people achieved. They built cities on a grid pattern that would not be seen again for millennia. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa sprawl across the landscape with streets as straight as surveyor's lines, intersecting at perfect right angles. Every home, from the grandest to the most modest, connects to a sophisticated drainage system. Fresh water flows through covered channels, waste disappears through carefully engineered sewers. In an age when most humans lived in simple huts, the Indus people bathed in public pools lined with fired brick, climbed staircases in multi-story buildings, and stored grain in warehouses larger than anything in Egypt or Mesopotamia. But here is what strikes me most profoundly. Among their artifacts, we find no monuments to warrior kings, no palaces celebrating conquest, no depictions of armies marching to war. Instead, we discover thousands of small terracotta figurines of a mother goddess, her body adorned with jewelry, her expression serene. We find seals depicting a figure seated in what appears to be a meditative posture, surrounded by animals. We find public baths that suggest ritual purification. We find standardized weights and measures that speak of order, fairness, and cosmic balance. The Indus people left us no texts we can read, no stories written in words we understand. Their script remains undeciphered, a mystery that has frustrated scholars for a century, yet their artifacts whisper to us across the ages. They speak of a society that valued cleanliness as something sacred, that saw the divine in female form, that practiced what may have been the earliest forms of yoga and meditation. Seeds planted here would flower thousands of years later in traditions we now call Hindu. Then, around 1900 BC, something changed. The great cities began to empty, not suddenly, not catastrophically, but gradually, like a slow exhalation. Climate shifted. The monsoons weakened. Rivers changed course. The Sarasvati River, celebrated in later texts as mightiest of all, dried to seasonal streams and finally disappeared altogether beneath the desert sand. Without the predictable floods that sustained agriculture, without the water that nurtured civilization, the urban centers could not endure. People migrated eastward toward more reliable rivers. They scattered into smaller settlements. They adapted. And into this transformed landscape came something new. Around 1500 BC, from the northwest mountain passes, groups of semi-nomadic peoples began arriving. They called themselves Arya, the noble ones. They rode horses and drove chariots, technologies largely unknown to the settled peoples of the Indus plains. They herded cattle and sheep across vast distances. They spoke an early form of Sanskrit, part of the great Indo-European language family that would eventually give rise to Persian, Greek, Latin, and most European tongues. They brought with them a religion centered not on temples or cities, but on fire and sacrifice performed in the open air. The story told for generations was simple. Invaders conquered locals, replacing one civilization with another. But reality, as it so often does, reveals itself more subtle and more fascinating. The archaeological evidence shows no signs of massive warfare, no burned cities, no sudden cultural rupture. Instead, we see gradual change, blending, synthesis. The newcomers and the indigenous peoples met, mingled, married, languages merged, religious practices intertwined. The goddess figures of the Indus continued being crafted even as Vedic hymns to sky gods were composed. The great bath culture persisted, Even as fire altars were built, what emerged was something unprecedented in human history. Picture these Aryan priests, these Vedic seers, gathered around fires under the crystalline night skies of the Punjab plains around 1200 BC. The fire crackles, ghee pours onto flames, sending sparks spiraling upward toward infinity, and they sing. By the gods, how they sing. Hymns of such power and beauty that they will be preserved without change for 3,000 years, passed from teacher to student in an unbroken chain of memory longer than any other continuous oral tradition on earth. These are the Rig Veda, the knowledge of praise, 10 books containing 1,028 hymns addressed to the forces that govern existence. Indra, who wields the thunderbolt and slays the drought demon Vritra to release life-giving waters. Agni, the sacred fire that transforms offerings into fragrant smoke and carries human prayers to celestial realms. Varuna, guardian of cosmic order, who knows every secret deed and watches over the moral law underlying all creation. Ushas, the radiant dawn, described with such tender beauty that you can feel the first light touching your face across 30 centuries. Listen to how they speak of creation itself, these ancient poets. In the Nasadiya Sukta, the hymn of creation, they contemplate the ultimate mystery. Then even nothingness was not, nor existence. There was no air then, nor the heavens beyond it. What covered it? Where was it? In whose keeping? Was there then cosmic water, in depths unfathomed? These are not simple tribal incantations. These are philosophers wrestling with questions that still occupy our finest minds. Before Socrates wondered about knowledge, before Plato imagined ideal forms, these Vedic seers questioned the very nature of existence. They asked whether even the gods might not know how creation truly began. They contemplated a reality beyond being and non-being, a mystery so profound that perhaps no consciousness, human or divine, could fully penetrate it. But the Vedas contained more than philosophy. They prescribed elaborate rituals that structured social order. The sacrifice, the yajna, became the pivot around which life turned. Brahmins, the priestly class, mastered the complex procedures and sacred formulas. Kshatriyas, the warrior aristocrats, sponsored great sacrifices and protected society. Vaishyas, the farmers and merchants, provided the wealth that sustained all, and Shudras served the other three. This fourfold division, the Varna system, emerged during this period, organizing society in ways that would persist for millennia. Yet even in these earliest texts, dissent echoes. Some hymns question the value of ritual. Some wonder whether proper action might matter more than proper sacrifice. The seeds of rebellion against rigid hierarchy were planted even as the hierarchy crystallized. The world these people inhabited was harsh and dangerous. Death came easily. Disease struck without warning. Crops failed. Enemies raided. The average lifespan rarely exceeded 30 years. In such a world, the Vedic sacrifice offered something precious: control. Through correct ritual, through precise pronunciation of mantras, through exact procedures passed down from ancient teachers, humans could influence cosmic forces. They could bring rain, ensure fertility, defeat enemies, win the favor of divine powers. But there was more to it than transaction, more than spiritual commerce. The best Vedic hymns reveal genuine wonder at existence itself. They celebrate the beauty of dawn, the power of storms, the mystery of consciousness. They express gratitude for life's gifts. They acknowledge human smallness before the vastness of reality. The sun rises, brilliant, dispelling darkness. He illuminates the world with light. He follows the path of primordial order, crossing the sky in his golden chariot. When you read these words, remember, the people who composed them saw the same sun you see. They felt the same warmth on their skin. They experienced the same daily miracle of light returning after darkness. Across all the centuries that separate us, across all the changes in technology and knowledge, this remains constant. The sun still rises. Wonder still catches the breath. By 1000 BC, Vedic society had fully established itself across northern India, from the Indus to the Ganges. Kings ruled from fortified settlements. Brahmins maintained the sacred fires and oral traditions. Agriculture expanded into new territories. Iron tools replaced bronze, allowing forests to be cleared and new lands cultivated. Population grew, but something else grew as well. Questions that ritual could not answer. Why do good people suffer? Why does death come to all, regardless of virtue? What happens after we die? If the gods control everything, why is there injustice? The elaborate sacrifices could procure specific benefits, but they could not explain suffering's purpose or provide liberation from existence's fundamental sorrows. And so, around 800 BC, something remarkable began to happen. People started walking away. Not everyone, but enough to notice. Individuals, often from comfortable circumstances, abandoned homes and social positions. They left cities and villages behind. They entered the forests. They sat beneath trees. They contemplated. They meditated. They sought not worldly benefits but ultimate truth. These forest philosophers, these seekers of liberation, would create the next great chapter in this unfolding story. They would take the cosmic questions posed in the Vedas and pursue them to conclusions that would shake the foundations of ritual religion. They would discover concepts that would change not just India, but eventually influence the entire world. Karma, the law of action and consequence. Samsara, the cycle of birth and death. Moksha, liberation from suffering. Atman, the eternal self. Brahman, the ultimate reality underlying all existence. But that transformation, that philosophical revolution, that was still ahead. For now, on these ancient plains, the Vedic fires still burned bright. Priests still chanted Sanskrit verses with exacting precision. Kings still sponsored great horse sacrifices that proclaimed their dominion. The old ways held firm, yet change was coming. In the forests, in the silence between thoughts, in the still point of meditation, seekers were discovering truths that would reshape everything. The eternal Dharma was preparing to evolve, to deepen, to become something far more complex and beautiful than even its founders could have imagined. The Indus seals spoke of balance and purity. The Vedic hymns sang of cosmic order and sacrifice. These two streams had merged into something new, and now, in forest clearings and beneath spreading trees, the next great synthesis was beginning. Philosophy was being born from ritual. Interior exploration was challenging exterior performance. The eternal questions were being asked with new urgency. What is the self? What is reality? What is the relationship between individual consciousness and cosmic consciousness? Can we transcend suffering? Is liberation possible? Stand here with me, at this hinge point in history. Behind us, 5,000 years of civilization along sacred rivers, the Indus cities with their geometric precision, the Aryan migrations with their thunderous hymns, the synthesis that created Vedic culture. All of this flows together like rivers meeting to form a mighty stream. And ahead lies one of humanity's most productive philosophical eras. Ahead lies the Buddha walking away from his palace. Ahead lies the Upanishads exploring consciousness with unprecedented rigor. Ahead lies the great questioning that will give birth to multiple schools of Sneed thought, each probing reality from different angles. Ahead lies transformation. The eternal Dharma did not spring fully formed from one revelation, one prophet, one sacred text. It grew organically, evolving through millennia, absorbing and synthesizing diverse influences, from Indus goddess figures to Vedic sky gods, from urban sophistication to nomadic vitality, from ritual precision to philosophical inquiry. Each age added its wisdom. Each generation built upon what came before, while daring to ask new questions. This is how living traditions work. They adapt. They respond to new challenges. They incorporate new insights. Yet through all changes, certain threads persist. The sense of cosmic order, of Rita, that underlies existence. The belief that ritual action matters. The conviction that beyond the visible world lies invisible reality. The quest for liberation from suffering. These themes, first sounded in the Indus Valley and early Vedic period, would echo through all subsequent centuries. The story we are following is not simple. It cannot be reduced to dates and dynasties, invasions and empires. It is the story of how human beings, faced with the same fundamental questions we still face, created systems of meaning that help them navigate existence. It is the story of how philosophy emerged from wonder, how ritual evolved toward devotion, how social structures formed and reformed in response to changing conditions. Most of all, it is a story that is still unfolding. The traditions born in these ancient times live on today. The Vedas are still chanted, the sacred fires still burn, people still seek liberation. The questions asked 5,000 years ago remain urgent. What does it mean to live well? How should we relate to the divine? What happens after death? What is our purpose? These are not questions that admit final answers. They are questions each generation must ask anew, in their own language, within their own context. And so, our journey continues. From these origins along sacred rivers, through all that is to come, we will trace how the eternal Dharma responded to challenges, absorbed new insights, created beauty, inspired devotion, and evolved into one of the world's most complex and profound religious traditions. The dawn has broken over the Indus Valley. The first light touches the Vedic sacrificial fires. The foundations have been laid. Now watch what rises from these beginnings. Watch what flowers from these ancient seeds. The story is just beginning. Deep in the forests of northern India, around 800 BC, a quiet revolution began, not with armies or upheaval, but with silence, with individuals sitting beneath trees, controlling their breath, turning awareness inward. These were the forest sages, and what they discovered would fundamentally alter the course of human spiritual thought. Imagine the journey of one such seeker, a man of privilege, perhaps a Brahmin priest or a wealthy householder, walks away from everything he knows. Behind him, a comfortable home, social status, the security of ritual tradition. Ahead, uncertainty, simplicity, the vast unknown territory of consciousness itself. He carries nothing but a water pot and simple cloth. He finds a clearing near a river, builds a small hut from branches and leaves, and begins to sit. At first, the mind rebels. Thoughts cascade like a waterfall, worries about family, memories of comfort abandoned, doubts about this strange choice. The body aches from unaccustomed stillness. Insects bite, heat oppresses. Every instinct screams to return to familiar life. But he persists. Day after day, week after week. Gradually, something shifts. The mental torrent slows. Gaps appear between thoughts. And in those gaps, he begins to perceive something extraordinary. A deeper reality beneath surface experience. A consciousness that observes thoughts but is not identical to them. An awareness that witnesses pleasure and pain but remains untouched by both. This discovery, repeated by countless seekers in countless forest groves, gave birth to the Upanishads. The word itself means sitting down near a teacher, receiving secret wisdom. These texts, composed between 800 and 400 BC, represent one of humanity's most profound philosophical achievements. They took the ritual religion of the Vedas and transformed it utterly. The Vedas had said, perform the correct sacrifice, pronounce the proper mantra, and influence cosmic forces. The Upanishads responded, the true sacrifice is internal. The real fire burns within consciousness. The ultimate reality cannot be manipulated by ritual but must be directly experienced through knowledge and meditation. Listen to the revolutionary teaching in the Chandogya Upanishad, where the sage Uddalaka instructs his son Shvetaketu. The young man has studied the Vedas for 12 years, mastered ritual procedures, memorized countless hymns. He returns home, proud of his learning. His father asks, did you ask for that instruction by which we hear what cannot be heard, by which we perceive what cannot be perceived, by which we know what cannot be known? The son, confused, asks what this teaching could be. The father explains through a series of analogies. He tells his son to dissolve salt in water. The salt becomes invisible, yet every drop tastes salty. That which is the subtle essence, the father teaches. In it all that exists has its self. That is the true, that is the self, that you are Shvetaketu, Tattvamasi, that you are, 3 words that contain a universe of meaning. The ultimate reality, the ground of all being, the consciousness that pervades existence, this is not separate from you. It is you. Your deepest self, stripped of all false identification, is identical with the cosmic self, with Brahman, with the Absolute. Consider what this implies. Not that you, with your particular personality and memories and preferences, are God, but that beneath all your individual characteristics, beneath the constructed self that thinks of itself as separate, there exists pure consciousness, and this consciousness is not yours alone. It is the same consciousness that looks out from every pair of eyes, that experiences through every sentient being, that underlies all existence. This was not presented as faith requiring blind acceptance. The sages insisted on direct verification through meditation and self-inquiry. They developed sophisticated techniques for distinguishing the eternal self, the Atman, from the temporary vehicles it inhabits. The body is not the self, it changes, ages, dies. Thoughts are not the self, they come and go like clouds across the sky. Emotions are not the self, they arise and pass away. Even the sense of I is not the ultimate self, it is a construct, a convention, ultimately unreal. So what remains when all these are stripped away? What witnesses the body's changes, observes thoughts arising, experiences emotions passing? The Upanishadic sages called it Atman, the eternal witness, pure awareness itself. And here is the stunning claim. This Atman is Brahman. Individual consciousness is cosmic consciousness. The drop is the ocean. The wave is the water. Separation is illusion. Multiplicity is appearance. Reality is one. But this raised urgent questions. If we are already Brahman, why don't we know it? Why do we suffer? Why do we feel separate, isolated, mortal? The answer: ignorance. Not simple lack of information, but fundamental misunderstanding of what we truly are. We mistake the temporary for the eternal. We identify with the body-mind complex rather than the unchanging awareness that observes it. We believe the ego sense is our true self when it is merely a useful fiction, like a character in a play mistaking itself for the actor. This ignorance, this avidya, causes us to act in ways that bind us to the cycle of birth and death. We crave pleasure, which leads to attachment. We fear pain, which leads to aversion. We grasp at permanence in an impermanent world, and these desires and aversions create karma. Karma. The word means action, but the concept is subtler. Every action, every intention, every thought leaves an imprint on consciousness. These imprints, These samskaras shape future experience. Good actions create pleasant consequences. Harmful actions create suffering, not through divine punishment, but through natural law as inexorable as gravity. And this karma binds consciousness to samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Die in ignorance, burdened with unfulfilled desires and unresolved karma, and consciousness takes birth again in a new body. The particular form depends on accumulated karma. Virtuous karma leads to fortunate rebirth, harmful karma to unfortunate ones. On and on the wheel turns, life after life, death after death. To the Upanishadic sages, this was not comfort but horror. Eternal recurrence was not blessing but bondage. Even rebirth in heaven was temporary. Once good karma exhausted itself, consciousness fell back into lower realms. As long as ignorance persisted, as long as the illusion of separation remained, suffering was inevitable. But there was a way out, moksha, liberation, not after countless lifetimes of gradual improvement, but potentially in this very life, through direct realization of truth. When ignorance dissolves in the light of knowledge, when the self realizes its identity with Brahman, when all sense of separation vanishes, karma can no longer bind. The wheel stops turning. The dreamer awakens. Liberation is achieved. This teaching was revolutionary for multiple reasons. It located authority not in priests or rituals, but in direct experience. It suggested that ultimate truth was accessible to anyone willing to undertake the necessary inner work. It implied that elaborate Vedic sacrifices, while perhaps useful for worldly benefits, were ultimately irrelevant to liberation. Most radically, it subordinated ritual to knowledge, external religion to internal realization. Not surprisingly, this threatened established religious authority. Brahmin priests had built their power on exclusive access to sacred knowledge and control over ritual procedures. Now forest philosophers were saying ritual was secondary, priestly mediation unnecessary, direct realization available to earnest seekers regardless of birth. The tension was inevitable, and into this philosophical ferment, around 560 BC, came a prince who would shake the foundations of Vedic society more powerfully than any other figure in Indian history. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. Born into the Shakya clan, heir to a small kingdom in what is now Nepal, he grew up in privilege and luxury. His father, King Shuddhodana, showered him with every comfort, perhaps hoping to bind him to worldly life. Beautiful palaces, talented musicians, exquisite foods, eventually marriage to the lovely Yashodhara, who bore him a son. But Siddhartha was haunted by questions. The traditional story tells of 4 fateful encounters: an old man, bent and frail, a sick man, writhing in pain, a corpse being carried to cremation, and finally, a wandering ascetic, serene despite possessing nothing. These visions shattered his comfortable illusions. Age, sickness, death. These awaited everyone, regardless of wealth or status. No palace walls could keep them out. On the night his son was born, Siddhartha made his decision. He kissed his sleeping wife and infant child farewell. He cut his princely hair with his sword. He exchanged silk robes for simple ascetic cloth, and he walked away from everything: kingdom, family, security, identity, to seek the solution to suffering. For 6 years, he studied with the greatest meditation masters of his age. He mastered techniques that brought profound altered states of consciousness. But these, he realized, were temporary. They provided escape from suffering, but not ultimate liberation. When the meditative state ended, ordinary consciousness and its problems returned. So he tried extreme asceticism, pushing his body to the edge of death. He ate a single grain of rice per day. His ribs protruded, his skin turned dark. He nearly died. And in this extremity, he realized, mortifying the body does not liberate consciousness, it merely tortures one temporary vehicle. Abandoning both indulgence and extreme asceticism, he sat beneath a pipal tree at Bodh Gaya and vowed not to rise until he achieved complete understanding. For 49 days he sat. He observed his mind with unprecedented precision. He watched thoughts arise and pass. He examined the nature of craving, aversion, and ignorance. He traced the chain of causation that binds beings to suffering. And then, on the night of the full moon, in the month of Vaisakha, enlightenment dawned. The Buddha, the awakened one, had seen through the illusion. He understood the fundamental nature of existence. He had discovered the path to liberation. What he taught was both radical and pragmatic. He began not with metaphysical speculation but with observable facts. Life involves suffering dukkha, not just dramatic pain, but the underlying unsatisfactoriness of conditioned existence. Even pleasure is tinged with suffering because it is impermanent, because clinging to it causes distress. This suffering has a cause, tanha, craving or thirst, the desperate grasping for pleasure, existence, and even non-existence, the fundamental delusion that satisfaction can be found in temporary phenomena. But here is the revolutionary claim: suffering can end, complete cessation is possible. Nirvana, literally blowing out the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion, is achievable. And there is a path to this cessation. The Noble Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. A practical program for transforming consciousness and ending suffering. Note what the Buddha did not say. He did not claim the Vedas were divinely revealed. He did not insist on the authority of Brahmin priests. He did not require belief in a creator god or eternal soul. In fact, he taught anatta, no self, denying the existence of the permanent Atman that Upanishadic sages proclaimed. This was direct challenge to Brahmanical orthodoxy, and the Buddha went further. He accepted disciples from all castes, including outcasts. He ordained women, creating the first order of Buddhist nuns. He taught in common Prakrit languages rather than Sanskrit. He democratized spirituality in ways that threatened the entire social order. For decades, he wandered northern India, teaching, establishing monasteries, creating a sangha, a community of practitioners. Kings became his students. Merchants supported his movement. Common people flocked to hear this message of liberation accessible to all regardless of birth. But Buddhism was not the only heterodox movement challenging Vedic authority. Mahavira, contemporary with the Buddha, taught the ancient Jain path of extreme non-violence and rigorous asceticism. The Ajivikas promoted fatalism. The Charvakas advocated materialism, denying afterlife and karma entirely. It was an age of tremendous philosophical creativity, of competing schools debating the nature of reality, knowledge, and liberation. Picture the scene in a royal court around 500 BC. King Janaka of Videha, renowned as both ruler and philosopher, has convened a great debate. Sages from various schools gather in his hall. Sacrificial Brahmins defend Vedic ritual. Upanishadic teachers expound the identity of Atman and Brahman. Buddhist monks argue for no-self and dependent origination. Jain teachers insist on the multiplicity of eternal souls. Materialists deny all metaphysics. The debates are fierce but conducted with respect. Each school presents its view. Each responds to objections. Logic is deployed with precision. Analogies illuminate complex points. The king listens, questions, probes. This is not about establishing orthodoxy but pursuing truth wherever it leads. Among the most famous debaters was Yajnavalkya, the brilliant Upanishadic sage. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we find him engaging in sophisticated philosophical discourse, defeating rivals, instructing even kings in ultimate truth. To his wife, Maitreyi, he teaches, "Truly, it is not for the sake of the husband that the husband is dear, but for the sake of the self. It is not for the sake of the wife that the wife is dear, but for the sake of the self. Everything we love because we see in it a reflection of our own eternal self." This was the intellectual climate when, in 326 BC, distant thunder announced approaching storm. Alexander the Great, having conquered Persia and much of the known world, turned his armies toward India. The young Macedonian king had heard tales of India's wealth and wisdom. He defeated the Persian satrapies in what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan. His armies crossed the Hindu Kush mountains. They approached the Indus River, the western boundary of the Indian world. King Ambi of Taxila, recognizing the futility of resistance, submitted peacefully and became Alexander's ally. But King Porus of the Punjab chose to fight. At the Battle of the Hydaspes River in 326 BC, two armies clashed in torrential monsoon rains. Porus commanded war elephants and experienced infantry. Alexander brought cavalry tactics honed through years of conquest. The battle raged for hours. Alexander's forces eventually prevailed, but they were shaken. Porus, wounded but defiant, impressed Alexander with his courage. When asked how he wished to be treated, Porus replied, "As a king." Alexander, moved by this dignity, restored Porus to his kingdom as an ally. But Alexander's army, exhausted by years of campaigning, confronted by fierce resistance and daunted by tales of even larger armies deeper in India, refused to advance further. At the Bias River, the invincible Macedonian war machine halted. Alexander, realizing he could not force his men onward, turned back. He would never see Macedonia again. Fever claimed him in Babylon in 323 BC, just 32 years old. His empire immediately fragmented, but his brief incursion into India had consequences. Greek ideas began filtering into Indian thought. Hellenistic art influenced Indian sculpture. The encounter between Greek and Indian philosophy would eventually produce fascinating syntheses. More importantly, Alexander's invasion revealed Indian political fragmentation. Dozens of small kingdoms, constant warfare, no unified power. Into this vacuum stepped one of history's most remarkable figures, Chandragupta Maurya. His origins remain obscure. Some sources suggest low birth, perhaps from the Shudra class. Others claim Kshatriya lineage. What is certain? Around 321 BC, with brilliant strategic vision and ruthless determination, Chandragupta began conquering. He defeated the Nanda dynasty that ruled Magadha, the most powerful kingdom in the Ganges Valley. He pushed back the remaining Greek garrisons in the northwest. Within a few years, he had created an empire spanning from Bengal to Afghanistan, from the Himalayas to the Deccan Plateau. He was guided by one of history's most fascinating political theorists, Chanakya, also called Kautilya, author of the Arthashastra. This text is Machiavelli's The Prince, written 1800 years earlier. It analyzes statecraft with cold pragmatism, how to maintain power, how to use spies, how to divide enemies, how to expand territory, how to control populations. Morality serves state interests. The ends justify the means. The king must be like the lion and the fox, powerful and cunning. Under Chandragupta and Chanakya, India experienced its first true Frumaja. Empire, centralized administration, efficient taxation, standing army, spy networks, road systems, standardized weights and measures. For the first time, most of the Indian subcontinent united under single rule. Chandragupta eventually abdicated, becoming a Jain monk and starving himself to death in the traditional Jain fast unto death, Salakana. His son Bindusara extended the empire further south. And then came Ashoka. Emperor Ashoka began his reign around 268 BC as a conqueror in his grandfather's mold. His most famous campaign targeted Kalinga, a kingdom on the eastern coast that had resisted Mauryan control. The war was brutal. According to Ashoka's own inscriptions, 100,000 were killed, 150,000 deported, many more died from famine and disease. Standing on the battlefield of Kalinga, surveying the carnage, something broke in Ashoka. He was overwhelmed by remorse. He had won his war, but at what cost? The dead could not be restored. The suffering could not be undone. What did conquest mean if it produced only misery? Ashoka converted to Buddhism, not superficially, but with profound commitment. He abandoned aggressive war. He turned from conquest by force to conquest by dharma, by righteousness. He erected pillars and rock edicts throughout his empire, proclaiming radical principles. He promoted non-violence, even regulating animal slaughter. He established hospitals for humans and animals. He planted shade trees along roads. He dug wells for travelers. He sent Buddhist missionaries to Sri Lanka, Central Asia, and even the Mediterranean world. He convened the Third Buddhist Council to settle doctrinal disputes. He created rest houses for pilgrims. He urged religious tolerance, proclaiming that all sects deserved respect because all sought truth in their own ways. His edicts are extraordinary documents. Carved in stone, many survive to this day. Our most direct connection to this remarkable emperor. He addresses his subjects directly, admitting his mistakes, proclaiming his ideals, urging ethical behavior. He speaks of Dharma not as ritual correctness but as moral goodness, kindness to living beings, generosity, truthfulness, purity, gentleness, gratitude. All men are my children, one edict proclaims, just as I desire for my children that they obtain welfare and happiness, both in this world and the next, so do I desire the same for all men. Here was a warrior emperor transformed into a philosopher king. Here was Buddhism receiving imperial patronage, spreading beyond India's borders, becoming a world religion. Here was proof that power could be wielded with compassion, that governance could serve more than mere control. Ashoka's empire did not long survive him. Within 50 years of his death, around 232 BC, the Mauryan Empire fragmented, but his vision endured. His pillars still stand, crowned with the four-lion capital that became independent India's emblem. His edicts still proclaim their message of compassion across 23 centuries. The age of forest sages and philosopher kings had transformed Indian civilization utterly. The Upanishads had discovered the eternal self and its identity with ultimate reality. The Buddha had charted a path to liberation through ethics and meditation, accessible to all regardless of caste. Mahavira had taught absolute non-violence and the multiplicity of viewpoints. Chanakya had analyzed political power with unprecedented realism. Ashoka had demonstrated that empire could serve ethical ends, from ritual to philosophy, from external sacrifice to internal realization, from Brahmanical exclusivity to Buddhist universalism, from blind tradition to rigorous debate, from conquest by force to conquest by dharma. The foundations laid in the Vedic age had given rise to an extraordinary diversity of spiritual and philosophical schools. India had become the world's laboratory for consciousness, exploration, for liberation practices, for ethical systems, for political theory. The questions raised and the answers proposed during this period would influence not just India, but all of Asia and eventually the entire world. Yet this was still not the final form. The tradition continued evolving. Popular devotion would challenge philosophical abstraction. Theistic schools would arise alongside non-theistic ones. The great epics would be composed, bringing philosophy to the masses through story. The classical age of Hinduism was dawning. But first, the seeds planted here had to germinate. The insights had to filter through society. The debates had to continue. The practices had to be refined. And new challenges would arise, demanding new responses. Stand here with me at the close of this transformative age. Behind us, forest clearings where sages discovered the eternal self. The Buddha walking dusty roads, teaching liberation. Ashoka's pillars proclaiming Dharma. Ahead, the crystallization of these insights into systems and schools. The flowering of art and architecture. The composition of texts that would be revered for millennia. The eternal Dharma had moved from dawn to morning. The light was growing stronger, and the most spectacular colours were yet to come. The centuries following Ashoka's death were turbulent. The Mauryan Empire crumbled. Foreign powers invaded from the northwest. Greeks, Scythians, Parthians, Kushanas. Buddhism continued spreading, but older Vedic traditions adapted and evolved. And then, around 320 AD, something extraordinary happened. A new dynasty rose in the Ganges heartland that would preside over what many consider India's golden age. The Gupta Empire began modestly. Chandragupta I married a Licchavi princess, gaining territory and legitimacy. His son Samudragupta proved to be a brilliant military strategist and cultured patron of arts. But it was Chandragupta II, known as Vikramaditya, who truly established Gupta glory. His reign, from roughly 380 to 415 AD, saw India reach heights of prosperity, cultural achievement, and intellectual brilliance rarely matched in human history. Consider what this empire represented. Unlike the harsh administrative state Chanakya envisioned, the Gupta rulers governed with relative lightness. Local kings retained considerable autonomy as long as they acknowledged Gupta sovereignty and paid tribute. Trade flourished along the Silk Road and maritime routes to Southeast Asia and Rome. Cities like Pataliputra, Ujjain, and Kanchipuram bustled with commerce. Universities at Nalanda and Taxila attracted students from across Asia. The Chinese Buddhist pilgrim Faxian, who travelled through India from 405 to 411 AD, left astonished accounts. He described prosperous cities where people moved freely, where hospitals treated the sick without charge, where criminals were punished with fines rather than mutilation. He marvelled at the absence of restrictions on travel, at the prosperity of monasteries, at the generally humane governance. India, in this period, was wealthy enough to be called the Golden Bird, Sonekichidia. Why? Because India produced what the world wanted: spices that flavoured Roman banquets, fine cotton cloth lighter than silk, sophisticated metalwork, including rust-proof iron pillars that baffle metallurgists even today, diamonds and precious gems, mathematical innovations like the decimal system and the concept of zero, medical knowledge including plastic surgery techniques that would not be rediscovered in the West for centuries, philosophical texts, scientific treatises, epic literature. The Romans paid for these goods in gold, literally. Archaeological excavations have uncovered hoards of Roman gold coins in southern India. Evidence of trade so extensive it worried Roman emperors who saw their gold reserves draining eastward. India absorbed this wealth and transformed it into art, architecture, and intellectual achievement. This was the age when Hinduism, as we recognize it today, truly crystallized. The Vedic sacrifice culture, already declining, gave way to temple worship and personal devotion. The abstract philosophies of the Upanishads remained for scholars, but for ordinary people, religion meant bhakti, devotion to a personal God who loved them and could be loved in return. And this required texts that made philosophy accessible, that taught theology through story, that presented complex ideas in forms that could be understood by everyone from scholars to servants. The Puranas fulfilled this need magnificently. The word Purana means ancient, and these texts claim to preserve old traditions. In reality, most were composed or compiled during the Gupta period, though they incorporated earlier materials. There are 18 major Puranas and dozens of minor ones, containing millions of verses, an ocean of mythology, cosmology, theology, history, and practical instruction. Each Purana typically covers 5 topics: the creation of the universe, its destruction and recreation, the genealogies of gods and sages, the reigns of various Manus who rule successive epochs, and the histories of solar and lunar dynasties. But this framework supports endless stories, hymns, rituals, pilgrimage guides, and philosophical teachings. Most importantly, different Puranas champion different deities as supreme. The Vishnu Purana and Bhagavata Purana exalt Vishnu. The Shiva Purana and Linga Purana glorify Shiva. The Devi Bhagavata elevates the goddess. This reflected and encouraged the development of distinct devotional traditions within the broader Hindu umbrella. Consider the Bhagavata Purana, arguably the most beloved of all Puranas. Its 10th book tells the story of Krishna's youth in the village of Vrindavan. These tales capture the imagination utterly. Krishna as a mischievous child, stealing butter from his mother's stores. Krishna as a young cowherd, dancing with the gopis, the milkmaids who love him with selfless devotion. Krishna lifting Mount Govardhana on his little finger to shelter villagers from Indra's wrathful storm. Krishna playing his flute by moonlight, calling souls to divine love. These are not abstract theological treatises. These are stories that make you laugh and weep. They present profound philosophy through narrative that touches the heart. When Krishna dances with the gopis, each one believing Krishna dances with her alone, this illustrates how the infinite divine can have intimate personal relationship with each individual soul. When Krishna steals butter, this symbolizes how God playfully steals the heart. When he lifts the mountain, this demonstrates divine protection and the supremacy of devotion over ritual. The Puranas democratized religion in ways that parallel what Buddhism had done centuries earlier. You did not need to be a Brahmin to access divine grace. You did not need to master Sanskrit or memorize Vedas. You needed only devotion, love, surrender. A low-caste woman's sincere prayer was worth more than a proud Brahmin's perfect ritual. God responded to the heart, not social status. But while the Puranas brought philosophy to the masses, scholars continued profound intellectual work. This was the age of the great philosophical systems, the darshanas, 6 orthodox schools that accepted Vedic authority while interpreting it differently. Nyaya focused on logic and epistemology, how we know what we know. Vaisheshika analyzed the physical world through atomic theory. Samkhya taught dualism between consciousness and matter. Yoga provided practical methods for liberation through meditation. Mimamsa defended Vedic ritual through sophisticated interpretation. And Vedanta, drawing on the Upanishads, explored the relationship between self, world, and absolute. Each school developed sophisticated arguments. Debates between schools sharpened logical precision. The great commentaries written during this period display intellectual rigor comparable to anything in Greek or Chinese philosophy. This was not blind faith but rational investigation allied with meditative insight, and all of this philosophical and religious ferment found expression in unprecedented artistic achievement. The Gupta period produced some of India's most sublime art and architecture. At Ajanta, Buddhist monks carved monasteries and prayer halls into sheer cliff faces, but more remarkably, they covered the walls and ceilings with paintings of such delicacy and sophistication that they rank among humanity's greatest artistic treasures. These frescoes, created between 200 and 600 AD, depict scenes from the Buddha's lives with profound psychological insight. The colors, made from minerals and organic materials, retain their brilliance across 16 centuries. The compositions demonstrate mastery of perspective, emotion, and narrative flow. At Elephanta, near present-day Mumbai, artists carved an entire temple complex from solid rock sometime around the mid-6th century. The centerpiece, a colossal three-headed bust of Shiva, the Trimurti, rising nearly 20 feet high. The three faces represent Shiva's aspects as creator, preserver, and destroyer. The central face, serene and meditative, embodies the absolute beyond all attributes. The left face, fierce and mustached, shows Shiva as destroyer. The right face, gentle and feminine, reveals Shiva's creative power. Stand before this sculpture. Let your eyes adjust to the cave's dim light. See how the artist has captured not just physical form but spiritual presence. This is not a statue to be worshipped from a distance. This is divine reality made visible, inviting you into encounter, into transformation. The rough rock walls and pillars frame the central image, creating a sacred geometry that draws awareness inward while simultaneously expanding consciousness outward. Embrace cosmic dimensions. At Ellora, an even more ambitious project unfolded over centuries. 34 caves, Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain, carved side by side in volcanic basalt rock. But Cave 16, the Kailasa temple, built in the 8th century, surpasses them all. This is not a cave carved into the cliff. This is a complete freestanding temple carved from the top down, out of a single rock outcropping. Workers began at the cliff's summit and excavated downward and inward, removing 400,000 tons of rock to create a temple complex that covers twice the area of the Parthenon. The Kailasa temple is dedicated to Shiva, designed to represent Mount Kailasa, his Himalayan abode. Every surface is covered with sculpture, depicting scenes from the epics and Puranas. Elephants support the temple base. Massive pillars rise to support the superstructure. Interior chambers contain shrines to various deities. Outside, life-sized elephants and lions stand sentinel. This was carved with hammer and chisel. No explosives, no modern machinery, just human hands, guided by devotion and artistic vision, working through generations to create something that even today seems impossible. The precision of the carving, the intricacy of the detail, the sheer ambition of the conception, all testify to what human beings can achieve when technical skill serves spiritual purpose. But these cave temples, magnificent as they are, represent one stream of development. Equally important were the great literary epics that took final form during this period and provided Hinduism with its most influential texts. The Mahabharata, the Great War of the Bharatas, is the longest epic poem in world literature. Nearly 100,000 verses, divided into 18 books, telling the story of two sets of cousins, the righteous Pandavas and the ambitious Kauravas, whose conflict for a kingdom escalates into a catastrophic war that nearly destroys civilization. But this is far more than a war. Story. The Mahabharata is an encyclopedia of Hindu culture. It contains philosophy, theology, ethics, statecraft, humor, romance, tragedy. It includes hundreds of subsidiary tales, each illuminating some aspect of dharma, of righteous conduct. Its famous saying captures its comprehensive scope. What is found here may be found elsewhere. What is not found here is found nowhere. At the epic's heart lies the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God, perhaps the single most influential text in all of Hinduism. The warrior Arjuna stands on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, facing an army that includes his beloved teachers, uncles, and cousins. War is inevitable. Victory may be possible, but at what cost? Arjuna refuses to fight. He throws down his bow and asks, "How can killing family be righteous, even if they have acted wrongly. Better to die than commit such sin. His charioteer, who is actually Krishna, God incarnate in disguise, responds with one of humanity's most profound philosophical and theological discourses. Krishna teaches karma yoga, the path of action performed without attachment to results. He reveals jnana yoga, the path of knowledge. He describes bhakti yoga, the path of devotion. He manifests his universal form, showing Arjuna the entire cosmos contained within divine being. He explains that the eternal self cannot be killed, that duty must be performed, that action with detachment liberates rather than binds. The Gita reconciles competing values that had seemed irreconcilable: action versus renunciation, knowledge versus devotion, ritual versus meditation. It suggests you can remain engaged in the world while pursuing liberation. You can fight when Dharma demands it while maintaining inner detachment. You can honor Vedic tradition while embracing devotional surrender. It is synthesis, brilliant synthesis, of everything that had come before. The Ramayana, attributed to the poet Valmiki, tells a simpler story with equally profound impact. Prince Rama, heir to Ayodhya's throne, is exiled to the forest for 14 years through palace intrigue. His devoted wife Sita and loyal brother Lakshmana accompany him. In the forest, Ravana, the demon king of Lanka, abducts Sita. Rama, aided by the monkey god Hanuman and an army of monkeys and bears, wages war against Ravana, rescues Sita, and returns home to claim his kingdom. On one level, this is a simple adventure tale, perfectly suited for recitation and performance. On another level, it is a treatise on ideal conduct. Rama is the perfect son, obedient to his father even when wronged, the perfect husband, devoted to Sita, the perfect king, putting duty above personal desire. Sita embodies wifely devotion and purity. Hanuman represents perfect devotion to God. Lakshmana shows fraternal loyalty. Even Ravana, the villain, displays courage and learning, his flaw being not evil but excessive pride and desire. The Ramayana has shaped Hindu ethics for 2 millennia. Parents name their children after its characters. Its festivals punctuate the year. Its stories teach children right from wrong. Its verses are chanted for protection and blessing. In North India, the Ramayana is staged annually during Dussehra festival as Ram Lila, allowing communities to participate in the sacred story. In Southeast Asia, versions of the Ramayana became national epics, shaping Thai, Cambodian, and Indonesian cultures. Both epics achieved something remarkable. They made philosophical concepts accessible through character and story. The Upanishads might teach about Dharma, but Yudhishthira's agonizing ethical dilemmas in the Mahabharata show what Dharma means in complex situations. The Gita might explain detachment, but Rama's conduct demonstrates it. Abstract becomes concrete. Theology becomes biography. During the Gupta period and immediately after, these epics spread throughout India in multiple regional versions and languages. Tamil poets created their own Ramayana. Bengali bards sang of Krishna. Kannada writers retold Mahabharata tales. Each regional tradition adapted the stories while maintaining core themes. Hinduism showed its remarkable capacity to unify without requiring uniformity, to create shared culture while celebrating diversity. Chinese pilgrims continued visiting India throughout this period, and their accounts give us invaluable glimpses of religious life. Xuanzang, who travelled through India from 629 to 645 AD, visited hundreds of monasteries and temples. He studied at Nalanda University, that great Buddhist institution where thousands of monks pursued advanced studies. His descriptions of doctrinal debates, library collections, and scholarly standards reveal an intellectual culture of extraordinary sophistication. But Xuanzang also noted the resurgence of Brahmanism. Buddhism, which had flourished under Ashoka's patronage, was declining in India even as it spread through East Asia. The older Vedic tradition, transformed and enriched by Puranic devotionalism, was reasserting itself. Temples to Vishnu and Shiva were multiplying. Brahmin priests were regaining social influence. The synthesis that became classical Hinduism was consolidating. This period saw the composition of texts that would govern Hindu practice for centuries. The Dharma Shastras codified law and social norms. The Grihya Sutras prescribed household rituals for every stage of life, from conception to cremation. The various agamas provided instructions for temple construction, deity installation, and worship procedures. Ayurvedic medicine texts systematized healing knowledge. Astronomical texts like the Surya Siddhanta achieved remarkable precision in calculating planetary movements. Mathematics flourished. Aryabhata, in 499 AD, calculated pi to 4 decimal places, explained eclipses scientifically, and developed algorithms for extracting square and cube roots. Brahmagupta, in 628 AD, established rules for calculating with zero and negative numbers, solving quadratic equations, and calculating compound interest. These mathematical advances would eventually reach the Islamic world, and from there, medieval Europe, revolutionizing Western mathematics. Medicine achieved sophistication unmatched elsewhere in the ancient world. Sushruta, probably working around 600 AD, described over 300 surgical procedures, including rhinoplasty, cataract removal, and caesarean sections. He classified surgical instruments, discussed antiseptic procedures, and explained anatomical structures based on careful dissection. Karaka compiled medical knowledge into a comprehensive system that understood health as balance and disease as imbalance, treating patients holistically. Indian metallurgists produced steel of such quality that Damascus swords, forged from Indian wootz steel, became legendary. The Iron Pillar of Delhi, erected around 400 AD, stands 23 feet high and weighs more than 6 tons of wrought iron. Despite 16 centuries of exposure to monsoon rains, it shows almost no rust, a metallurgical achievement that still puzzles scientists. But perhaps the most lasting achievement of this golden age was establishing the image of the divine in forms that have inspired devotion ever since. The representation of gods and goddesses in stone, bronze, and paint became standardized during this period. Vishnu appears in various forms, standing regally with 4 arms holding conch, discus, mace, and lotus, reclining on the cosmic serpent Shesha, incarnating as Rama or Krishna. Shiva manifests as the great yogi in meditation, as the cosmic dancer Nataraja, as the abstract Lingam, as the terrible Bhairava. The goddess appears as gentle Lakshmi bringing prosperity, as fierce Durga slaying demons, as all-powerful Kali with her garland of skulls, as wise Saraswati with her Veena. Each iconographic detail carries meaning. Vishnu's 4 arms represent his omnipresence. The conch symbolizes the primordial sound. The discus represents the mind. Shiva's 3rd eye represents wisdom beyond duality. His crescent moon shows time's passage. His matted locks contain the Ganges, life-giving sacred river. Durga's lion mount represents power. Her many weapons, gifted by various gods, show divine forces united against evil. These images were not mere decoration. They were theology made visible, meditation aids, focal points for devotion. A worshipper gazing at Shiva as Nataraja saw not just a beautiful sculpture, but the cosmic dance of creation, preservation, and destruction. The circle of flames, the universe. The drum, creation's sound. The fire, destruction. The dwarf beneath his foot, ignorance crushed. The raised hand, blessing and protection. The pointing hand, refuge in the raised foot, liberation, every element taught, and these icons were installed in temples that themselves embodied cosmic order. Hindu temples from this period follow sophisticated architectural principles drawn from texts like the Vastu Shastra. The temple represents Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain at the universe's center. Its vertical tower points toward heaven. Its innermost sanctum, the Garbha Griha or womb chamber, houses the deity in cool darkness. Worshippers circumambulate the shrine, moving from outer courtyard through progressively more sacred zones until reaching the Holy of Holies. The temple is a geometric mandala realized in 3 dimensions. Its proportions follow sacred mathematical ratios. Its orientation aligns with cardinal directions and astrological considerations. Its sculptures educate while inspiring, depicting gods and goddesses, celestial beings and earthly creatures, scenes from epics and Puranas, symbols and sacred geometry. Walking through a temple becomes a spiritual journey, from mundane reality to divine presence. By the end of the Gupta period, around 550 AD, classical Hinduism had achieved its mature form. The Vedas remained authoritative, but were supplemented by a vast literature of Puranas, epics, philosophical texts, and practical manuals. Ritual sacrifice had largely given way to temple worship and personal devotion. The old Vedic gods like Indra and Agni had receded while Vishnu, Shiva, and the goddess emerged as supreme. The caste system had hardened, but devotional movements asserted that love transcended birth. Philosophy ranged from strict non-dualism to qualified non-dualism to dualism, from this worldly engagement to world-renouncing asceticism, accommodating diverse temperaments and insights within a flexible framework. This was not uniformity but unity in diversity. A Brahmin scholar studying Vedanta in Varanasi and a Tamil peasant singing devotional songs to Murugan participated in the same tradition, despite vast differences in practice and understanding. What united them? Acceptance of karma and rebirth, reverence for ancient texts even if not studied, participation in festivals and life cycle rituals, pilgrimage to sacred sites, respect for cows and Brahmins, vegetarianism or at least beef avoidance, the concept of dharma as cosmic and moral order. The goal of moksha, however, defined devotion to some form of the divine, whether personal deity or impersonal absolute. This classical synthesis would face severe challenges in the centuries ahead. Islamic invasions would test Hindu resilience. Colonial conquest would force modernization and reform, but the foundations laid during the Gupta period and the following centuries would prove remarkably durable. The Puranic stories still captivate, the epic characters still inspire, the philosophical system still attracts serious students, the temple architecture still awes, the artistic achievements still move hearts. Stand with me at the end of this golden age. Behind us, centuries of synthesis and creativity, the Puranas making theology accessible, the epics teaching ethics through story, the temples rising as cosmic diagrams in stone, the philosophers debating ultimate reality, the artists creating beauty as pathway to truth, the mathematicians and scientists advancing human knowledge. Ahead, challenges that would shake this classical synthesis to its foundations, but also ahead, new forms of devotion that would reach unprecedented emotional intensity, regional languages producing religious poetry of unsurpassed beauty, temple building reaching even more spectacular heights, philosophy continuing to evolve and respond to new questions. The Golden Age was ending, but the tree planted in the Indus Valley and nurtured through the Vedic and Upanishadic periods had now fully flowered, and its seeds were spreading far beyond India's borders, carrying Hindu and Buddhist ideas throughout Southeast Asia, inspiring magnificent temple complexes at Angkor and Borobudur, shaping civilizations from Sri Lanka to Java to Tibet. The eternal Dharma had reached classical maturity. New chapters were about to unfold. As the Gupta Empire fragmented in the 6th century, political power in India dispersed into regional kingdoms, but this apparent decline masked extraordinary cultural vitality. From 600 to 1200 AD, southern and eastern India experienced a temple-building frenzy and devotional revolution that would reshape Hinduism forever. The great temple kingdoms rose: the Chalukyas in the Deccan, the Pallavas near present-day Chennai, the Pandyas in the far south, and most spectacularly, the Cholas, who would create an empire spanning southern India and extending maritime influence to Southeast Asia. These were not merely political entities. They were sacred kingdoms where temporal and spiritual power intertwined, where kings proved their legitimacy by building temples, where religion and statecraft were inseparable. Consider the Chola Empire at its height under Raja I, who ruled from 985 to 1014 AD. His capital, Thanjavur, became one of medieval India's most splendid cities. But his supreme achievement was the Brihadisvara temple, completed around 1010 AD, dedicated to Shiva. This temple defies comprehension even today. The main tower, the Vimana, rises 216 feet into the sky, crowned with a capstone carved from a single block of granite, weighing an estimated 80 tons. How did 11th century engineers lift this enormous stone to such height? Theories abound: inclined ramps stretching for miles, elephants pulling ropes, sophisticated pulley systems. We do not know for certain. We know only that they achieved it. But engineering marvel represents only part of the story. Walk through this temple complex and you encounter theology carved in stone. The outer walls display hundreds of sculptures depicting Shiva in his 81 dance forms. Shiva as the cosmic dancer, Shiva as the great teacher, Shiva defeating demons, Shiva blessing devotees. Each sculpture is a sermon, each posture a lesson in divine nature. Inside the sanctum stands a massive lingam, the abstract representation of Shiva as creative power beyond form. Twice daily, priests perform elaborate rituals passed down for 1,000 years. They bathe the lingam with milk, honey, and sacred waters. They dress it with flowers. They offer food. They sing hymns. They wave lamps in circular patterns, the arati ceremony that transforms fire into blessing. And this was not unique. Across southern India, temple towers pierced the heavens. The Pallavas at Kanchipuram and Mahabalipuram created architectural wonders. At Mahabalipuram, they carved temples from living rock on the seashore, where waves have crashed against them for 13 centuries. They created the Shore Temple, its silhouette against the Bay of Bengal, one of India's most iconic images. They carved the massive bas-relief depicting the descent of the Ganges, where gods, humans, animals, and celestial beings crowd together in stone narrative panels stretching over 90 feet. But these temples were far more than artistic achievements or royal vanity projects. They were economic engines, social centers, and ritual focal points that structured community life. A major temple employed thousands. Priests performed daily worship. Musicians sang devotional hymns. Dancers performed sacred dances. Sculptors created new images. Architects supervised expansions. Accountants tracked donations. Guards provided security. Cleaners maintained purity. Farmers worked temple lands. Weavers created cloths for deity garments. Jewelers crafted ornaments. Florists grew sacred flowers. Temples owned vast lands donated by kings and wealthy devotees. They functioned as banks, lending money at interest. They stored grain reserves for famine relief. They provided shelter for travelers. They supported scholarship and education. They sponsored festivals that brought entire regions together in celebration. The temple at Thanjavur, under the Cholas, exemplifies this. Inscriptions record that Raja Raja gifted the temple 400 villages, whose revenues supported the elaborate ritual calendar. The temple employed 600 temple servants of various types. It maintained a school where 400 students studied the Vedas and received free food and lodging. It provided a retirement home for elderly Brahmins. It operated a hospital. This was the temple as the heart of civilization. Remove the temple and society would collapse. The temple gave structure, meaning, and material support to human community. But while kings built temples and sponsored rituals, something equally revolutionary was happening at the grassroots. The Bhakti movement, the revolution of devotion. Bhakti means loving devotion to a personal God, not philosophical speculation about the nature of Brahman, not ritual correctness, not caste status, simply love, passionate, all-consuming, intensely personal love, directed toward the divine in intimate relationship. This movement emerged in Tamil-speaking southern India around the 6th century AD and spread northward over the following centuries, transforming Hinduism more profoundly than any political change or philosophical development. The earliest Bhakti saints were the Alvars, 12 poet saints devoted to Vishnu, and the Nayanars, 63 poet saints devoted to Shiva. They came from all castes, high and low. Among the Alvars were Brahmins and a Shudra. One was a woman, Andal, who composed sublime poetry, imagining herself as Krishna's bride. Among the Nayanars were kings and outcasts, warriors and farmers. What united them was ecstatic devotion, expressed in poetry of surpassing beauty. They composed in Tamil, not Sanskrit, making their message accessible to all. They sang of God with the intensity of lovers separated from the beloved. They wept at the divine beauty. They raged at God's apparent absence. They surrendered completely to divine will. Listen to Andal's voice across 13 centuries. O Lord who lifted the mountain, O dark-hued one, my heart melts for you. My eyes overflow with tears. I cannot bear separation. Come to me. Take me to you. I am yours completely. This is not abstract philosophy. This is the cry of the heart in love. This is relationship, intimate and immediate, where God becomes more real than anything in the material world. Or hear Karaikal Ammayar, a woman Nayanar who renounced beauty and domestic life to wander as an ascetic, singing of Shiva. The Lord dances in the burning ground among corpses and demons. See his matted locks flying wild. See the snakes writhing about his arms. See his terrible beauty, frightening and fascinating, destroyer and liberator. She saw Shiva not as the benign deity of temple worship, but as the wild ascetic, the awesome power that annihilates illusion. Her poetry embraced the terrifying aspects of divinity that conventional piety avoided. The Nayanar, Appar sang, "Those who speak of you are my kith and kin. Those who meditate on you are my clan. The place where your praises are sung is my country. O God of Perur, I cannot live without you, even for a moment." Here Bhakti creates new identity, transcending caste and geography. The community of devotees becomes family. The temple becomes homeland. Nothing matters but God. This was revolutionary teaching packaged in unforgettable poetry and melody. The Bhakti saints walked from village to village singing. They attracted crowds. They challenged caste restrictions by dining together regardless of birth. They elevated women and low-caste people to spiritual authority based solely on the intensity of their devotion. They insisted that sincere love from a Shudra was worth more than hypocritical ritual from a Brahmin. Inevitably, this challenged Brahmanical authority. The old religion emphasized birth, ritual knowledge, and proper performance. The Bhakti movement said birth didn't matter, elaborate rituals were unnecessary, and what God wanted was not correct procedures but hearts on fire with love. Yet this was not rejection of tradition, but transformation from within. The Bhakti saints revered the Vedas, honored Brahmins, and supported temples, but they insisted that the essence of religion was devotion, not ritual mechanics. They democratized spirituality while maintaining connection to classical tradition. The movement produced theological reflection as profound as any philosophy. The Shaiva Siddhanta tradition in Tamil Nadu developed sophisticated theology around Shiva worship. The Vaishnava tradition, systematized by the great philosopher Ramanuja in the 11th century, articulated qualified non-dualism that balanced divine transcendence with intimate relationship. Ramanuja challenged the strict non-dualism of Shankara, which we'll encounter shortly. Where Shankara taught that only the absolute Brahman was real and the world was illusion, Ramanuja insisted that both God and world were real, though the world depended on God as body depends on soul. Where Shankara emphasized knowledge as the path to liberation, Ramanuja championed devotion. God was not impersonal absolute, but Vishnu, who loved his devotees and responded to their love with grace. This theology validated what the Alvars had sung centuries earlier. Devotion was not inferior to knowledge, but the highest path. Love was not emotion to be transcended, but the fundamental nature of the divine-human relationship. Meanwhile, in the 8th and 9th centuries, a Brahmin philosopher from Kerala was articulating the most rigorous non-dualist philosophy Hinduism would produce. Adi Shankara, born around 788 AD, became one of history's most influential thinkers. Shankara was a prodigy. The traditional accounts, embellished with legend, say he mastered the Vedas by age 8 and took monastic vows shortly after. He spent his brief life, he died around 32, travelling throughout India, debating opponents, writing commentaries, establishing monasteries, and systematizing Advaita Vedanta, non-dualist interpretation of the Upanishads. His central teaching was uncompromising. Brahman alone is real. The world of multiplicity, of separate objects and individual souls, is Maya, not illusion exactly, but dependent reality. The way a mirage is real as appearance but unreal as water. The individual self, Atman, is not separate from Brahman but identical to it. Liberation comes through knowledge, through seeing through the illusion of separation and realizing one's true nature as the Absolute. This was not new teaching, the Upanishads had said as much, but Shankara articulated it with unprecedented logical rigor and defended it brilliantly against Buddhist and dualist opponents. His commentaries on the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutras became foundational texts for Hindu philosophy. More practically, Shankara established 4 monasteries at the 4 corners of India, at Sringeri in the south, Puri in the east, Dwarka in the west, and Badrinath in the north. These mathas served as centers of learning and spiritual authority. Their abbots, heads of disciplic lineages claiming descent from Shankara himself, remain influential figures in Hindu religious life today. Shankara also organized wandering ascetics into 10 orders, the Dashanami tradition. He established standards for monastic life, combining scholarly rigor with renunciation. To this day, monks in Shankara's tradition add Ananda, bliss, to their names, signifying their identity with the blissful Brahman beyond all attributes. His legacy is complex. He defended Hindu philosophy against Buddhist arguments so effectively that he contributed to Buddhism's decline in India. Yet some called him a hidden Buddhist, because his non-dualism resembled certain Buddhist teachings. He emphasized knowledge over devotion, yet he composed devotional hymns of great beauty. He taught world renunciation, yet he organized monasteries and engaged energetically in worldly debates. The story of Shankara meeting the outcast captures his teaching's paradox. Walking through Varanasi, Shankara encountered an untouchable and stepped aside to avoid pollution. The outcast challenged him. "You teach that all is one Brahman, yet you distinguish between Brahmin and outcast. Which is real, your philosophy or your action?" Shankara, recognizing the divine teacher in disguise, bowed and acknowledged the lesson. If all is indeed one, caste distinctions are ultimately meaningless. Yet Shankara did not challenge caste socially. He maintained it was valid for the empirical world, even while ultimately unreal. This tension between absolute truth and relative truth, between renunciation and engagement, runs through his teaching and remains unresolved. During this same period, bronze casting reached extraordinary heights in southern India. The Chola bronzes, created through the lost wax process from the 9th to 13th centuries, represent some of humanity's supreme sculptural achievements. The most iconic is Shiva as Nataraja, the cosmic dancer. The image became standardized. Shiva dances in a ring of flames, one foot raised, the other crushing the dwarf of ignorance. 4 arms extend in perfect symmetry. Upper right hand holds a drum, creation's rhythm. Upper left hand holds fire, destruction's flame. Lower right hand gestures blessing. Lower left hand points to the raised foot, refuge and liberation. Every element conveys meaning. The circle of flames, the cosmos. The drum, primordial sound, the vibration that manifests worlds. The fire, the dissolution that returns manifestation to potential. The dancing pose, the dynamic reality, neither at rest nor permanently active but eternally in creative motion. The calm face amid cosmic dance, the still center within all change. The dwarf, ignorance, forgetfulness, ego. To contemplate this image is to receive a complete theological education. Creation and destruction are not opposites but complementary aspects of one process. The divine is not static perfection but dynamic creativity. Reality is dance, constant flux, yet underlying the flux is unchanging consciousness symbolized by Shiva's serene expression. These bronzes were not museum pieces. They were temple images, carried in festival processions, dressed in silk, adorned with flowers, offered worship. The finest Chola bronzes display craftsmanship so exquisite that when light falls correctly, the metal seems to come alive, seems almost to breathe. And these images joined the festival processions that became central to Hindu devotional life. The great temple festivals, Utsavas, structured the year. During these festivals, the deity's bronze image was removed from the inner sanctum, installed on massive wooden temple cars pulled by hundreds of devotees, and paraded through streets while thousands gathered to receive darshan, the auspicious sight of the divine. Imagine the scene during the Chitra festival at Madurai, honoring the goddess Meenakshi. The massive temple chariot, 60 feet high, is decorated with painted panels depicting divine exploits. The goddess's image sits enthroned inside. Hundreds of men grasp thick ropes and begin pulling. The chariot creaks forward. Musicians play drums and wind instruments. Brahmins chant Vedic mantras. Devotees throw flowers. The crowd surges, everyone seeking a glimpse, hoping to pull the rope and earn merit, crying out the divine name. The chariot makes its stately progress through the streets. Wealthy merchants have erected pavilions where priests offer elaborate worship. Poor families have scattered flower petals on the route. Children climb walls and trees for better views. The entire city participates. Social distinctions momentarily dissolve in the collective ecstasy of divine celebration. These festivals reinforce community identity and religious devotion while demonstrating temple power and royal legitimacy. They were theology performed, making abstract doctrine tangible through ritual action and communal participation. Music and dance evolved as offerings to the divine. The Devadasi system, temple dancers dedicated to deity service, preserved and developed classical dance traditions. These women, trained from childhood, performed intricate choreographies that combined movement, gesture, facial expression, and rhythm to narrate divine stories. Each hand gesture, mudra, had specific meaning. Each facial expression conveyed particular emotion. Each foot pattern followed strict rhythmic cycles. Bharatanatyam in Tamil Nadu, Odissi in Odisha, Kathakali in Kerala, these classical dance forms emerged from temple worship. They were prayer through movement, meditation through rhythm, devotion through disciplined artistic expression. Music, too, became systematized as sonic yoga. The raga system organized melodies according to time of day, season, and emotional mood. Specific ragas were believed to have power beyond aesthetic pleasure. Properly performed, they could bring rain, heal illness, or induce specific spiritual states. The Carnatic music tradition of southern India and Hindustani tradition of the north developed elaborate theoretical frameworks and training systems. Both dance and music shared the conviction that beauty was sacred, that artistic excellence was spiritual practice, that aesthetic experience could become vehicle for divine encounter. By the 12th century, temple kingdoms dominated southern India, while Hindu kingdoms in the north faced new challenges from Islamic invasions. But before we turn to those trials, we must acknowledge what this temple age achieved. It created architectural wonders that still inspire awe. It produced devotional poetry of unsurpassed emotional intensity. It developed theological systems that balance transcendence and intimacy. It established ritual patterns that structure Hindu life today. It proved that Hinduism could evolve, could absorb new influences while maintaining continuity, could speak to both scholars and peasants, could unite diverse practices within broad framework. The Bhakti revolution especially transformed Hinduism permanently. After the Alvars and Nayanars, after Ramanuja's theology, after the ecstatic poetry in vernacular languages, Hinduism could never again be purely Brahmanical, purely ritualistic, purely restricted to elite castes. The door had opened. Devotion had democratized access to the divine. Love had proven more powerful than learning. This would matter enormously in the centuries ahead when Hinduism faced existential challenges from Islamic conquest and later colonial domination. The Bhakti tradition would prove remarkably resilient precisely because it did not depend on temples, on elaborate rituals, on Brahmin mediation. It required only a heart willing to love and surrender. Stand with me at the close of this temple age. Behind us, soaring granite towers touching the sky, bronze images of sublime beauty, poetry that still moves hearts to tears, philosophy that still challenges the finest minds. Music and dance refined to spiritual perfection. Communities gathered in joyous festival worship. Ahead, the thunderous arrival of armies bearing a very different faith. Temples destroyed and temples preserved. Hindu kingdoms fighting desperate resistance. And through it all, the Bhakti saints singing on, proving that love cannot be conquered, that devotion needs no temple, that the divine dwells in the heart beyond reach of any sword. The eternal Dharma had flowered magnificently. Now it would be tested as never before. The year is 1025 AD. At Somnath, on the western coast of Gujarat, stands one of Hinduism's most sacred temples, dedicated to Shiva. Pilgrims come from across India to worship at this ancient site where, legend says, the moon god Soma bathed to regain his luster. The temple complex is wealthy beyond measure. Golden chains suspend emeralds before the lingam. 300 musicians and 500 dancing girls serve the deity. The treasury overflows with centuries of donations. Then, from across the northwest mountains, comes thunder. Mahmud of Ghazni, the Turkish sultan who rules from Afghanistan, has raided northern India 17 times before, seeking plunder to fund his empire. But this raid targets Somnath specifically. He has heard of its wealth, yes, but also of its religious significance. The destruction of this temple will proclaim the triumph of Islam and the impotence of Hindu gods. His army appears before Somnath's walls in January 1026. The defenders, confident in their deity's protection, resist fiercely. Mahmud's forces besiege the temple for 3 days. When the walls are finally breached, the slaughter begins. Traditional accounts, likely exaggerated but conveying the horror, speak of 50,000 killed. Mahmud enters the inner sanctum. Before him stands the ancient Shiva lingam. Hindu priests plead, "Take the temple's wealth, but spare the sacred image." Mahmud refuses. He raises his mace and shatters the lingam. The fragments, according to his court historians, are carried back to Ghazni to be incorporated into the steps of a mosque, where true believers will tread upon them. This single act, whether historical details are precisely accurate or not, traumatized Hindu consciousness. The invincible had been violated, the sacred had been desecrated, the gods had not protected their own sanctuary. But we must understand, this was not the beginning of Islam's encounter with India. Muslim traders had been visiting Indian ports for centuries, establishing small communities, practicing their faith peacefully alongside Hindus. Arab armies had conquered Sind in 712 AD, but that conquest remained limited to the far northwest and eventually became absorbed into the Indian cultural world, with Muslim rulers adopting local customs and languages. What changed in the 11th century was the intensity and religious zeal of invasions from Central Asia. The Turkish and Afghan warriors who swept through the Khyber Pass came as Ghazis, warriors of the faith, earning religious merit through conquest of infidel lands. They saw Hindu idol worship as particularly offensive polytheism demanding correction. Mahmud of Ghazni was the first but not the last. Over the following centuries, wave after wave of invasion crashed against Hindu kingdoms. Muhammad of Ghor conquered Delhi in 1192, establishing the first lasting Islamic sultanate in India. The Delhi Sultanate, under various Turkish and Afghan dynasties, controlled northern India from 1206 to 1526. The pattern repeated: invasion, conquest, temple destruction, forced conversions, tax burdens on non-Muslims, yet also gradual accommodation, synthesis, the emergence of Indo-Islamic culture. The story is more complex than simple conquest and resistance. Some sultans were zealots who demolished temples systematically. Others were pragmatic rulers who realized they governed a predominantly Hindu population and needed Hindu cooperation. They employed Hindus in administration, granted jagirs to Hindu warriors, protected selected temples that demonstrated political loyalty. The Vijayanagara Empire in the south maintained Hindu independence for 3 centuries, from 1336 to 1646, proving that Muslim conquest was not inevitable or complete. But the psychological impact was profound. For the first time, Hinduism faced a rival claiming exclusive truth, demanding conversion, backed by military might. Buddhism and Jainism had challenged Hindu philosophy, but shared fundamental assumptions about karma and rebirth. Islam was different. One God, one prophet, one book, one community of believers, and everyone else destined for hellfire unless they converted. How did Hinduism respond to this existential challenge? Not with unified resistance, the political fragmentation prevented that. Not with counter-conversion campaigns, Hinduism lacked missionary infrastructure. Instead, Hinduism responded in characteristically diverse ways that both resisted and adapted. At the popular level, the Bhakti movement intensified. When temples were destroyed, devotion became more interior, less dependent on external structures. When priestly hierarchies were disrupted, direct relationship with God became more precious. The medieval Bhakti saints sang with even greater urgency, finding in divine love a refuge no invader could touch. Consider Kabir, the weaver poet who lived in Varanasi around 1440 to 1518. His origins remain disputed. Some say he was born to a Hindu family, others to Muslim converts. What matters is that Kabir transcended both traditions while drawing from both. He sang in the common Hindi vernacular with devastating clarity. The stone you worship is just a stone. Better to grind grain with it. The God you seek is not in stone temples or mosques. He lives in the breath, in consciousness, in the witnessing self. This was radical teaching. Kabir rejected caste, ridiculed empty ritual in both Hindu and Muslim practice, mocked Brahmins and mullahs alike, proclaimed that the divine reality was neither Hindu nor Muslim but beyond all names and forms. I am not Hindu. I am not Muslim. This body is a palace where both Hindu and Muslim live. I have realized the one Lord who dwells in all. Yet this universalism was rooted in Hindu concepts of the Atman and Brahman, in Sufi ideas of divine unity and annihilation of ego. Kabir synthesized, creating something new from the meeting of traditions. His poetry spread through northern India, sung by wandering singers, memorized by illiterate peasants, preserved despite challenging both Hindu and Muslim orthodoxy. In Rajasthan, Mirabai, the princess saint born around 1498, embodied devotion carried to ecstatic extremes. Married into a royal family, she scandalized society by abandoning conventional wifely duties to devote herself entirely to Krishna. She danced in temples, sang in public, associated with low-caste devotees, rejected social norms that restricted women. Her in-laws tried to poison her. Tradition says the poison transformed into nectar. They sent her a basket with a cobra inside. The cobra became a sacred image. She survived these attempts because God protected his beloved devotee. Her songs overflow with longing. O my beloved dark-skinned Lord, without you I cannot sleep, cannot eat. My body has become weak with yearning. When will you come? When will you take me to you? The pain of separation is killing me. This was the language of human love applied to divine relationship, intensely personal, erotically charged, utterly surrendered. Mirabai cared nothing for propriety, everything for union with her Lord. She represents bhakti at its most extreme and most authentic. In the East, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, born in 1486 in Bengal, inaugurated a Krishna devotion movement of tremendous emotional power. He taught that the present age, the Kali Yuga, was so degraded that complex spiritual practices were useless. Only one practice worked, chanting the names of God with love and devotion. He would dance through the streets of Navadvipa and Puri, arms raised, tears streaming down his face, calling out, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, in ecstatic abandon. Crowds joined him. Brahmins and outcasts danced together, forgetting social divisions in the overwhelming experience of divine love. Chaitanya taught that devotion required no learning, no ritual knowledge, no caste status. The illiterate cobbler's sincere chant was worth more than the proud scholar's philosophical discourse. This radical egalitarianism attracted vast followings, especially among lower castes and women for whom conventional Hinduism offered little spiritual authority. In Maharashtra, a long line of sant poets created a devotional literature in Marathi that spoke to ordinary people's religious experience. Namdev, Tukaram, Eknath, Ramdas, these figures, spanning several centuries, sang of the god Vithoba, a form of Krishna worshipped at Pandharpur. Their poetry was simple, direct, emotionally powerful. Tukaram sang, I have no caste, no ancestry. I am the servant of God's servants. What do I care for worldly honor? My wealth is the name of God constantly on my lips. Meanwhile, in the north, Tulsidas, born 1532, composed the Ramcharitmanas, retelling the Ramayana in Awadhi, a Hindi dialect. This work became perhaps the most beloved text in northern India, recited in homes, sung in temples, dramatized in annual Ram Lila performances. Tulsidas wrote during the Mughal period when Hindu kingdoms were falling and Islamic power seemed invincible. His Ramayana offered hope. Rama, the ideal king, embodying Dharma perfectly, ultimately triumphant over demonic forces. The subtext was clear to Hindu audiences suffering under foreign rule, but Tulsidas also emphasized devotion over ritual, moral conduct over birth status, inner purity over external observance. He made Rama accessible to everyone, from learned Brahmins to illiterate peasants. His opening lines became the prayer of millions. I bow to Sri Rama, who with Sita and Lakshmana and Hanuman dwells in my heart. I bow to my Guru, who opened the eye of wisdom. All these bhakti movements shared common themes: emphasis on devotional love over ritual correctness, use of vernacular languages instead of Sanskrit, inclusion of women and low castes, criticism of empty formalism, sometimes synthesis of Hindu and Islamic ideas, always the insistence that sincere devotion mattered more than social status or learned theology. They represented Hinduism's resilience and adaptability. Unable to resist militarily, Hinduism transformed spiritually, creating forms of practice that did not depend on temples or priestly mediation, that could survive conquest and persecution, that spoke to the human heart in language everyone understood. At the same time, Hindu philosophy continued developing. The various Vedanta schools debated the relationship between God, world, and soul. Madhva, the 13th century philosopher, articulated pure dualism. God, souls, and matter are eternally distinct. Nimbarka taught dualism in non-dualism, a middle position. Vallabha emphasized pure non-dualism through grace rather than knowledge. These philosophical distinctions might seem abstract, but they had practical implications. If you believed in Shankara's absolute non-dualism, ritual and devotion were ultimately unnecessary, only knowledge of your identity with Brahman mattered. If you followed Ramanuja's qualified non-dualism or Madhva's dualism, devotion to a personal God was the highest path because you and God were eternally distinct even in liberation. The philosophical debates continued in Sanskrit, accessible mainly to scholars. The bhakti poetry and vernacular languages reached everyone. Both were necessary. Both contributed to Hinduism's survival and transformation during this challenging period. The Mughal Empire, established in 1526 by Babur, a descendant of both Timur and Genghis Khan, brought a new dynamic. The early Mughals were relatively tolerant. Akbar, who ruled from 1556 to 1605, was remarkably open-minded for a Muslim emperor. Akbar abolished the jizya tax on non-Muslims. He married Hindu princesses and honored their right to practice their faith. He invited scholars from different religions to his court for debates about theology and philosophy. He even attempted to create a syncretic religion, Din-i-Ilahi, combining elements from Islam, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, and Christianity. It failed to attract followers, but the attempt itself was extraordinary. At Akbar's court, the poet-musician Tansen, originally a Hindu, performed ragas of such power that legend credits him with lighting lamps through sound alone. Akbar's chief minister was a Hindu Brahmin, Raja Todar Mal. The emperor commissioned Hindu architects alongside Muslim ones, creating the unique Indo-Islamic architectural synthesis visible in Mughal monuments. But this tolerance was contested. Orthodox Muslim scholars criticized Akbar's innovations. His great-grandson Aurangzeb, who ruled from 1658 to 1707, reversed the tolerant policies. He reimposed the jizya tax, destroyed temples, and enforced Islamic law more strictly. Yet, even Aurangzeb's reign was complex. He employed Hindu administrators and generals. He gave grants to selected temples. His harshness had political as much as religious motivation. He faced rebellions from Hindu kingdoms and needed to consolidate power. The Marathas under Shivaji resisted Mughal power successfully, creating a Hindu kingdom that championed religious independence. Throughout this period, pilgrimage sites became focal points of resistance and continuity. When temples were destroyed at one location, devotion intensified at protected sites. The great pilgrimage destinations, Varanasi, Puri, Rameshwaram, Dwarka, Badrinath, Kedarnath, Amarnath, maintained unbroken worship traditions despite political upheavals. Pilgrims risked long, dangerous journeys to demonstrate that the sacred could not be conquered. The institution of the Akharas, militant ascetic orders, emerged partly in response to Islamic conquest. These were organizations of warrior monks, trained in martial arts as well as spiritual practices, who protected pilgrimage routes and defended temples. They represented Hinduism learning to fight back, adapting to new threats by combining renunciation with military resistance. At the village level, beyond the reach of sultanates and empires, Hinduism simply continued. Peasants worshipped local goddesses, celebrated seasonal festivals, performed life cycle rituals, told stories of gods and heroes. No sultan could police every village, enforce conversion everywhere, or prevent mothers from singing traditional lullabies to their children. The deep roots of Hindu practice, embedded in daily life and annual cycles, proved impossible to eradicate. Women particularly maintained tradition through household rituals. The vrats, religious observances performed for family welfare, passed from mother to daughter. The stories explaining each vrat preserved mythology and ethics. The fasting and festivals structured time according to sacred calendar. This domestic religion, often dismissed as superstition by reformers, preserved Hindu practice when public worship was dangerous. By the 18th century, as Mughal power declined and regional kingdoms asserted independence, a kind of equilibrium had emerged. Islam was established as a permanent presence in India. Millions had converted, voluntarily or under pressure, but Hinduism had survived, had adapted, had even flourished in new forms. The Bhakti saints had proven that faith could not be conquered by force. The philosophical traditions had maintained intellectual continuity. The temples, where they survived or were rebuilt, continued their rituals. The pilgrimages went on. The festivals were celebrated. The stories were told. The songs were sung. Hinduism had been tested as never before. It had suffered grievously, temples destroyed, sacred texts burned, forced conversions, cultural humiliation, but it had not been destroyed. It had bent but not broken. It had learned, adapted, transformed. The religion that emerged from these trials was different from classical Hinduism, but recognizably continuous with it. Stand with me at the threshold of the modern age. Behind us, centuries of conquest and resistance, destruction and preservation, forced change and stubborn continuity. Mahmud's mace shattering the Somnath Lingam, Akbar's court where religions debated freely, Aurangzeb's armies facing Maratha guerrillas. Through it all, Kabir singing of the formless one, Mirabai dancing in ecstatic devotion, Tulsidas writing Rama's glory, countless unnamed devotees keeping faith alive. Ahead, new challenges, perhaps even more threatening than Muslim conquest. European colonial powers arriving with superior weapons, technologies and ideas. Christian missionaries questioning Hindu beliefs and practices. Western education undermining traditional certainties. The modern world demanding that ancient traditions justify themselves or perish. But also ahead, a renaissance, a renewal, a reformation, Hindu thinkers who would engage Western thought while defending Hindu wisdom, social reformers who would challenge caste and superstition from within tradition, spiritual teachers who would carry Hindu ideas across the globe, independence movements that would draw on Hindu concepts while creating secular democracy. The trials of faith under foreign swords had forged a Hinduism that was resilient, adaptable, deeply rooted, yet capable of change. These qualities would prove essential in the transformations to come. The eternal Dharma had survived the sword. Now it would face the challenge of modernity. In 1757, at the Battle of Plassey in Bengal, a British East India Company force of 3,000 defeated a Bengali army of 50,000. This was not primarily a military victory, but the culmination of bribery, betrayal, and political maneuvering. Yet its consequences would reshape India and Hinduism utterly. The British did not arrive as religious conquerors like the Muslims before them. They came as merchants seeking profit, but gradually, incrementally, the trading company became a territorial power, then an empire. By 1857, the British controlled most of India either directly or through puppet princes, and with political control came cultural domination. The British brought technologies that dazzled: railways, telegraphs, printing presses, Western medicine, modern education. But they also brought devastating critiques of Hindu civilization. Christian missionaries declared Hinduism barbarous polytheism mired in superstition. British administrators pointed to caste oppression, widow burning, child marriage, and idol worship as evidence of civilizational inferiority. Utilitarian philosophers like James Mill wrote histories of India emphasizing despotism, irrationality, and backwardness. For educated Hindus exposed to Western ideas, this was profoundly disorienting. Many of their criticisms had force. Sati, the practice of widows burning on their husbands' funeral pyres, was indeed horrific whether religiously sanctioned or not. Child marriage did cause immense suffering. The treatment of outcasts was morally indefensible. Rigid caste hierarchies did stifle human potential. Yet wholesale condemnation of Hindu civilization felt wrong. The philosophical sophistication of the Upanishads, the mathematical achievements, the artistic glories, the devotional literature, the ethical teachings, all of this had value. How to acknowledge genuine problems while defending genuine achievements. How to reform without losing identity. How to engage Western thought without surrendering to Western cultural imperialism. These questions produced the Hindu Renaissance, a period of remarkable intellectual ferment and social reform from roughly 1800 to 1947, when India achieved independence. The pioneer was Raja Ram Mohan Roy, born in 1772 in Bengal. Brilliant, multilingual, familiar with Sanskrit, Persian, Arabic, and English learning, Roy attempted a synthesis of East and West that would preserve what was valuable in both. He founded the Brahmo Samaj in 1828, a reformed Hindu organization that rejected idol worship, caste distinctions, and ritual complexity, while embracing monotheism, reason, and social reform. Roy was particularly passionate about abolishing sati. He witnessed his own sister-in-law forced onto her husband's pyre, an experience that haunted him. He marshaled scriptural arguments against sati, showing it had no basis in the Vedas. He wrote pamphlets, gave speeches, lobbied the British government. In 1829, largely due to his efforts, the British banned sati in territories under their control. Conservative Hindus opposed this interference in religious practice. Roy responded that religion should serve human welfare, not sanctify cruelty. His approach became a template: use reason and moral arguments to critique problematic practices, appeal to ancient scriptures to show that the highest Hindu teachings supported reform, distinguish eternal spiritual truths from temporal social conventions. This allowed reformers to champion change while claiming fidelity to authentic Hinduism. But Roy's rationalist approach, with its rejection of image worship and emphasis on abstract monotheism, appealed mainly to Western-educated elites. Most Hindus continued traditional devotional practices, The Brahmo Samaj remained a small, influential movement rather than a mass organization. A very different figure emerged in Ramakrishna, born in 1836 in a Bengal village. Where Roy was intellectual and reformist, Ramakrishna was ecstatic and traditional. He served as a priest at the Dakshineswar Kali temple near Calcutta, where he experienced intense mystical states that left him unconscious for hours. Ramakrishna worshipped the Divine Mother, the goddess Kali, with passionate devotion that scandalized conventional priests. He would weep before her image, laugh in ecstasy, enter trances so deep that attendants feared for his life. He practiced various spiritual disciplines, tantric rituals, Vedantic meditation, even Christianity and Islam for periods, and claimed to experience the divine reality through each path. His teaching was simple. All religions are different paths to the same truth. The Divine Mother appears in different forms to different devotees according to their nature and needs. Arguing about which religion is superior is like fighting over whether the Ganges should be called by its Bengali or Hindi name. It's the same sacred river. This radical religious pluralism differed sharply from Roy's rationalism. Ramakrishna did not reject traditional practices or criticize social customs. He simply loved God with all-consuming intensity and insisted that sincere devotion in any tradition led to realization. His chief disciple, Swami Vivekananda, born in 1863, combined Ramakrishna's spiritual intensity with intellectual brilliance and social concern. Vivekananda was Western educated, familiar with philosophy and science, initially skeptical of religious claims, but encountering Ramakrishna transformed him utterly. After Ramakrishna's death in 1886, Vivekananda wandered India as a monk, witnessing the poverty, suffering, and degradation that afflicted millions. He became convinced that India needed not just spiritual wisdom, but practical reform, education, and social uplift. Spirituality that ignored human suffering was worthless. In 1893, he attended the Parliament of Religions in Chicago, representing Hinduism at this gathering of world faiths. His address began simply, "Sisters and Brothers of America." The audience erupted in applause at this inclusive greeting. Then Vivekananda proceeded to articulate Hinduism's universal principles with an eloquence and power that stunned Western listeners. He spoke of Hinduism's ancient teaching, that truth is one, though sages call it by different names. He condemned religious sectarianism and fanaticism. He proclaimed that Hinduism had always been tolerant, had never sent armies to convert by force, had welcomed persecuted minorities from other religions. He presented Vedanta philosophy as the rational solution to Western materialism and dogmatic religion alike. The speech made him an international sensation. He spent several years in America and Europe, lecturing, writing, establishing Vedanta societies. He demonstrated that Hindu philosophy could engage Western thought as an equal, could even claim superiority in its psychological sophistication and philosophical rigor. But Vivekananda's message to Hindus was challenging. He criticized superstition, caste oppression, and passivity. He demanded that Hinduism become socially engaged, serving the poor and downtrodden. He founded the Ramakrishna Mission to combine spiritual practice with social service, running schools, hospitals, and relief programs, while maintaining monasteries and meditation centers. Shiva is in the poor, in the weak, in the outcast, he declared. To serve them is to worship God. Religion that does not address human suffering is no religion at all. This was revolutionary teaching. Traditional Hinduism emphasized renunciation and detachment from worldly concerns. Vivekananda insisted that the highest spirituality expressed itself in compassionate action. He reinterpreted karma yoga not as performing caste duties but as selfless service to humanity. Other reformers tackled specific social evils. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar campaigned for widow remarriage and women's education. Dayananda Saraswati founded the Arya Samaj in 1875, promoting Vedic authority while rejecting later Hindu practices he considered corrupt idol worship, caste rigidity, child marriage. He advocated return to the pure Vedic age as he imagined it. Pandita Ramabai, born in 1858, converted to Christianity but continued championing Hindu widows and women. She established homes where child widows could receive education and escape destitution. Her work exposed the cruelty of orthodox Hindu treatment of widows' shaved heads, white clothing, restricted lives, treatment as inauspicious. Jyotirao Phule and his wife Savitribai Phule fought caste oppression, opening schools for untouchables and women in the 1850s. They challenged Brahmin domination and reinterpreted Hindu texts to argue for equality. Their work laid groundwork for later Dalit liberation movements. Meanwhile, scholars were recovering India's past with new eyes. Western Orientalists and Indian researchers published ancient texts, studied archaeological sites, traced historical developments. Indians learned that their civilization was extraordinarily ancient, that Sanskrit was related to European languages, that Indian mathematics and astronomy had achieved remarkable sophistication. This scholarship had double effects. It gave Indians pride in their heritage, countering British claims of civilizational inferiority. But it also revealed how much had been forgotten, how traditions had changed over time, how practices claimed as eternally Vedic were actually medieval innovations. This historical consciousness made tradition both more precious and more contingent. The printing press revolutionized Hindu religious life. Sacred texts previously accessible only to those who could afford manuscripts or who memorized them now became widely available. The Bhagavad Gita, previously one text among many, was published in numerous editions and translations, becoming the single most influential Hindu scripture. The Upanishads, the epics, the Puranas, all entered circulation in affordable printed forms. This democratized religious knowledge but also created new orthodoxies. Printed texts froze what had been fluid oral traditions. Regional variations became standardized. Vernacular texts were translated into English, making them accessible globally but also interpretable through Western concepts. Then came the figure who would synthesize reform, tradition, and political resistance more powerfully than anyone. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Born in 1869, Gandhi studied law in England, worked in South Africa, and returned to India in 1915 to lead the independence movement. But he was not just a political leader. He was a religious reformer who reimagined Hindu concepts for modern times. He took ahimsa, non-violence, traditionally understood as individual ethical principle mainly relevant for monks, and transformed it into a revolutionary political strategy. Non-violent resistance, satyagraha, or truth force, became the weapon through which the colonized could defeat the colonizer without resorting to violence that would corrupt the freedom movement itself. He took the Bhagavad Gita, which explicitly endorses war, when Dharma demands it, and interpreted it allegorically as an internal spiritual battle. He elevated manual labor, traditionally despised as lowly, into spiritual practice. He personally cleaned latrines to challenge caste prejudices. He called untouchables, Harijans, children of God, and demanded their inclusion in Hindu society. Gandhi's Hinduism was both traditional and radically reformed. He venerated the Vedas but rejected untouchability as a perversion of true Hinduism. He practiced traditional devotional singing but welcomed Muslims, Christians, and atheists into the freedom movement. He lived as an ascetic but engaged passionately with politics. He claimed to be Orthodox Hindu while challenging nearly every social practice orthodoxy defended. His critics, both traditional and modern, attacked him from all sides. Orthodox Hindus thought him too reformist. Rationalists thought him too religious. Ambedkar, the great Dalit leader, argued that Gandhi's reforms were too little, too late, that caste could not be reformed from within, but must be abandoned entirely. Muslim leaders feared that independence would mean Hindu majority rule. Communists dismissed his spiritualized politics as bourgeois mystification. Yet, Gandhi's mass appeal was undeniable. Millions followed him in non-violent resistance campaigns. His fasts moved multitudes. His simple lifestyle modeled renunciation, adapted to modern political struggle. His insistence that means must align with ends, that you cannot achieve just society through unjust methods, resonated deeply. Other figures contributed to the Renaissance. Sri Aurobindo, revolutionary turned yogi, developed integral yoga combining spiritual evolution with material progress. Rabindranath Tagore, poet and Nobel laureate, celebrated Hindu themes in literature while criticizing nationalism and orthodoxy. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, philosopher and later President of India, interpreted Hinduism for Western audiences, emphasizing its rational and experiential dimensions. By 1947, when India achieved independence, Hinduism had been profoundly transformed. Practices like sati and temple prostitution were legally banned. Women increasingly received education. Untouchables gained constitutional protections, though discrimination persisted. The caste system was officially rejected, even as it remained socially powerful. Hinduism engaged modern thought, science, and democratic values while maintaining ritual traditions and devotional practices. But independence came at terrible cost. The partition of India into Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan caused one of history's greatest human catastrophes. Between 10 and 20 million people fled across new borders. Between 1 and 2 million died in communal violence. The dream of Hindu-Muslim unity that many had cherished died in rivers of blood. Gandhi himself was assassinated in January 1948 by a Hindu extremist who thought him too sympathetic to Muslims. The man who had preached non-violence throughout his life died by violence, shot while walking to a prayer meeting. Stand with me at this hinge point. Behind us, the colonial encounter that forced Hinduism to defend itself, to reform, to modernize. Roy's rationalism, Ramakrishna's ecstasy, Vivekananda's eloquence, the reformers battling social evils, Gandhi transforming ancient concepts into political weapons. The printing press, Western education, new scholarship, social movements. Ahead, independent India, attempting to build secular democracy while accommodating religious diversity. Hinduism spreading globally as Indian diaspora carried traditions worldwide. Ancient practices meeting space-age technologies. Yoga becoming exercise phenomenon. Meditation apps delivering age-old techniques. Hindu nationalism rising to challenge secular ideals. The colonial crucible had refined Hinduism, burning away some dross, hardening some structures, transforming the tradition into something that could engage modernity while maintaining ancient roots. Whether this represented genuine renaissance or dangerous distortion, creative adaptation or loss of essence, these debates continue. The eternal Dharma had survived yet another trial. Now it would face the opportunities and challenges of the global age. Midnight, August 14th, 1947. As the clock strikes 12, Jawaharlal Nehru rises in India's Constituent Assembly to deliver his famous Tryst with Destiny speech. India awakens to freedom, but the freedom is fractured. Partition's wounds bleed. Hindu-Muslim violence tears communities apart. Refugees stream across newly drawn borders carrying whatever they can salvage. Independent India faces an impossible challenge. Forge unity from stunning diversity. Hundreds of languages, thousands of castes, multiple religions, regional identities stronger than national consciousness. And the question that haunts the new republic: What role should Hinduism play in a nation where Hindus comprise 80% of the population but democracy demands secularism? The Constitution, adopted in 1950, chooses the secular path. India will not be a Hindu state but a pluralist democracy protecting all religions equally. Untouchability is abolished. Caste discrimination is illegal. Religious freedom is guaranteed. Hindu personal law is reformed to grant women more rights, while Muslim and Christian personal laws remain separate. Yet secularism in India means something different from Western secularism. The state does not separate from religion but maintains equal distance from all religions. It supports religious institutions, regulates temples, sponsors pilgrimages, protects minority practices. This creative ambiguity allows Hinduism to remain culturally dominant while legally balanced by minority protections. Village Hinduism continues much as before. Farmers still worship field goddesses before planting. Women still observe fasts for family welfare. Festivals still mark the agricultural and religious calendar. The grandmother still tells grandchildren stories of Rama and Krishna. Ancient rhythms persist beneath the surface transformations of modernity, but urban, educated Hindus face unprecedented choices. Modern careers disrupt traditional caste occupations. Love marriages challenge arranged unions. Women enter professions once unthinkable. Nuclear families replace joint households. Migration separates individuals from ancestral temples and communities. How does one remain Hindu when traditional structures dissolve? New forms emerge. Apartment-dwelling families create home shrines replacing absent temples. Printed calendars with deity images substitute for elaborate altars. Morning worship shrinks from elaborate rituals to brief prayers fitting tight schedules. Festivals adapt. Diwali celebrated with electric lights instead of oil lamps. Diwali played with industrial dyes rather than natural colors. The diaspora, Hindus settling abroad, faces even sharper challenges. In America, Britain, Canada, Australia, the Caribbean, East Africa, Hindu communities recreate traditions in alien contexts. They build temples combining multiple regional deities under one roof, creating pan-Hindu institutions that would seem strange in India where regional traditions remain distinct. Second-generation immigrants struggle with identity. They speak English better than ancestral languages. They know American culture more intimately than Indian. Yet parents insist they remain Hindu, attend temple, celebrate festivals, eventually marry within the community. The negotiation between heritage and assimilation produces creative syntheses and painful tensions. But the diaspora also exports Hinduism in unprecedented ways. The Beatles visit Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in Rishikesh in 1968, sparking Western fascination with meditation and Eastern spirituality. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness, founded by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada in 1966, introduces millions to bhakti through street chanting, vegetarian food, and temple worship. Yoga transforms from spiritual discipline to global phenomenon. Millions practice asanas for health and stress relief without knowing their origins in Hindu philosophy. Meditation apps deliver mindfulness techniques descended from ancient practices to smartphones worldwide. Ayurveda meets Western wellness culture. Concepts like karma and chakras enter popular vocabulary. This globalization creates tensions. Is yoga still Hindu when practiced in secular gyms? Is meditation Buddhist or Hindu or simply universal? Does commercialization of spiritual practices represent sharing wisdom or cultural appropriation? These debates rage between traditionalists who insist on preserving authentic lineages and modernizers who celebrate Hinduism's global influence. Technology reshapes practice in unexpected ways. Pilgrims live-stream darshan from Varanasi temples to devotees worldwide. Virtual puja services allow overseas Hindus to sponsor rituals at ancestral shrines via websites. Apps provide daily prayers, festival calendars, and astrological consultations. Online gurus reach global audiences, bypassing traditional guru-disciple relationships. Meanwhile, Hindu nationalism rises as political force. The Bharatiya Janata Party, rooted in organizations promoting Hindu identity, governs India periodically from 1998 onward. They argue India's secular consensus has discriminated against the Hindu majority while appeasing minorities. They champion building the Ram temple at Ayodhya on the site of a demolished mosque, merging religious symbolism with political power. Critics warn that Hindu nationalism betrays Hinduism's pluralist spirit, threatens minority rights, and reduces complex tradition to narrow political ideology. Supporters counter that Hindus deserve to assert cultural identity in their first homeland after centuries of foreign domination. The debate exposes fundamental questions about Hinduism's relationship to Indian national identity. Women increasingly challenge patriarchal restrictions. Female priests conduct rituals at major temples despite orthodox opposition. Activists question menstrual taboos preventing women from entering certain sacred sites. Courts intervene, sometimes supporting reform, sometimes deferring to tradition. The conversation about gender in Hinduism grows more vigorous and contentious. Dalit movements continue asserting dignity and demanding equality. Many Dalits convert to Buddhism, Christianity, or Islam to escape caste oppression. Others reclaim Hindu identity while challenging Brahmin dominance and reinterpreting scriptures to emphasize equality. The caste system, though legally abolished, remains socially powerful, generating ongoing struggles for justice. Environmental movements discover ecological wisdom in Hindu concepts. The rivers are sacred, so pollution is sacrilege. Trees are divine, deforestation is sin. The Chipko movement, where villagers hug trees to prevent logging, drew on Hindu reverence for nature. Contemporary Hindu environmentalism mines tradition for resources addressing climate crisis. Yet Hinduism also adapts to consumerism. Temples become tourist destinations with entry fees and commercial management. Religious festivals drive economic activity through sales of decorations, sweets, and clothes. Spiritual gurus operate global organizations with sophisticated marketing. The boundary between sacred and commercial blurs. Through all these changes, certain practices endure. The Kumbh Mela, held every 12 years at sacred river confluences, still attracts tens of millions of pilgrims in the largest religious gathering on earth. The Char Dham pilgrimage to 4 Himalayan shrines continues, despite modern transportation making the journey easier. Varanasi remains the city where every Hindu hopes to die, where cremation on the Ganges Ghats promises liberation. The philosophical traditions persist. Scholars still study Vedanta, debate Shankara versus Ramanuja, write commentaries on ancient texts. Ashrams teach meditation techniques preserved for millennia. Tantric traditions, often misunderstood in the West, maintain esoteric practices. The diversity of Hindu thought, from strict non-dualism to devotional theism, from world-renouncing asceticism to world-affirming celebration, remains vibrant. Contemporary gurus adapt teachings for modern audiences. Some emphasize meditation and yoga's psychological benefits. Others focus on devotional practice and temple worship. Still others engage social issues, environmental concerns, or interfaith dialogue. The multiplicity reflects Hinduism's enduring capacity to speak to different temperaments and needs. What can we say, looking back across 5,000 years, that Hinduism has shown extraordinary resilience, adapting to wave after wave of change while maintaining recognizable continuity. The Indus seals and Vedic hymns, the Upanishadic philosophy and Buddhist challenge, the Bhakti devotion and temple worship, the trials under Islamic rule and colonial conquest, the modern Reformation and global diaspora through it all, certain themes persist. The quest for liberation from suffering, the conviction that reality extends beyond material appearance, the practice of seeking truth through multiple paths, the celebration of divine manifestation in countless forms, the structuring of life through ritual and festival, the transmission of wisdom through stories and songs. These remain constant even as expressions vary infinitely. Hinduism's greatest strength may be its refusal of uniformity. It encompasses strict monotheism and exuberant polytheism, rigorous philosophy and ecstatic devotion, world renunciation and world affirmation. It includes those who worship no images and those who adore Krishna's form, those who seek liberation through knowledge and those who find it through love. This flexibility has allowed Hinduism to survive when more rigid systems might have shattered. Yet this same flexibility creates challenges. What holds together such diversity? What makes someone Hindu if practices and beliefs vary so dramatically? The answers remain contested. For some, it's accepting Vedic authority. For others, it's participating in Hindu culture regardless of belief. For still others, it's identification with a tradition rather than adherence to specific doctrines. As we stand in the present moment, Hinduism faces both unprecedented opportunities and serious challenges. Global reach and influence have never been greater, yet commercialization, politicization, and cultural dilution threaten authentic practice. Environmental crisis, technological disruption, and social inequality demand responses that tradition must generate from ancient resources applied to contemporary problems. The eternal Dharma continues evolving, as it has for 5 millennia. Each generation receives the tradition, interprets it, adapts it, and passes it forward transformed yet recognizable. The stories that enchanted children 5,000 years ago still captivate. The questions the Upanishadic sages asked still provoke inquiry. The devotional songs of medieval saints still move hearts. The rituals performed in Vedic times still sanctify life transitions. This is the miracle, that something so ancient remains so alive, that traditions rooted in prehistory speak to the space age, that wisdom cultivated over millennia still illuminates human existence. The forms change from Indus seals to temple towers to meditation apps, but the essential seeking continues. The eternal Dharma flows on, a river fed by countless tributaries, changing course over time yet never ceasing, reflecting the sky above while carrying the soil of ages. Where it flows next, what forms it will take, what challenges it will face, these remain unknown. But that it will continue, adapting and enduring, seems certain. For 5,000 years, through empires and invasions, through glory and suffering, through transformation and continuity, the tradition has flowed. And as long as humans seek meaning beyond materialism, as long as hearts yearn for the divine, as long as minds probe the nature of reality and consciousness, the eternal Dharma will continue offering its ancient yet ever-new wisdom to those who seek. The journey continues, the story unfolds, and you, listening to these words across time and space, are part of this living tradition, this ongoing conversation between past and present, this eternal seeking of truth that makes us human.